Hello, my name is Sophie. I'm the events coordinator at Village Books. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. We are so thrilled to be welcoming back Rick Steves to Bellingham. If you could all do me a favor and please silence your cell phones and just join me in welcoming the one and only Rick Steves.
Thank you so much. And I've been on this stage many times talking about the skills of European travel and the beauties of broadening your perspective through travel. And today, I am delighted to share with you a talk that before this week I had never given. And it's about this book, On the Hippie Trail. And I've never really given a talk until this week, as I've been going around the country on a book tour, where I don't need to worry about selling the book because you've already had to buy it to get in. So that's kind of nice. You are holding right now on your laps a collector's item because that's the first printing of the book. And last week, my publisher had to rush out another one that had a different cover. Do you see the little words on the very top? So, thank you very much. 4 months ago, my publisher sat me down and said, "We think this can be a New York Times best-selling book." And I said, "It's crazy." And then they really convinced me that it might do it. And they said, "But you're going to have to go around the country and give a bunch of talks, you know?" Because that's what you do if you're a small publisher. You have to front-load all your sales. And, you know, all the bookstores, like Village Books, buy 500 books in advance and you come, and so on. But it worked, and Bill Gates beat me. But I'm really thankful for you getting the book and being here today. And I get to tell the story of this book. You probably know that I've long been a traveler. And I used to be a piano teacher. My students wouldn't practice in the summer. It just made sense to me to go to Europe. I'll see you in September. And I traveled, and I learned from my travels, and I was getting better and better. But the whole story we're going to talk about today is before I became the travel writer. This is when I was the piano teacher, and I hadn't even thought to be a travel writer. And I just traveled for kicks, absolutely for kicks. This was a day after graduating from high school in 1973. My good buddy Gene Openshaw and I took off for Europe, did the Eurail thing. This is before I had any inkling about the importance of packing light. I bought the biggest backpack external frame that money could buy, and I had a tube tent, I had a mess kit, I had a little metal tin on the top where I put all my books, and I just thought, if I got the capacity, I got to use it. That was my packing idea. Well, you'll see on the Hippie Trail I had a much smaller bag, but I'm really lucky to have a good friend, Gene, to be my buddy as we travel, and you'll see him across the Hippie Trail as we continue. But even on that very first trip, when I was just 18 years old, I was writing a journal. I took a hardbound book with me, and I noticed as I was preparing this whole thing about this, me being a traveler before I was a professional traveler, I had this passion for writing everything down. And this is the last 2 pages of that journal when I was 18 years old, and it's a summation of all the places where we slept and how much it cost us. And I don't know if you can read it from your vantage point, but this was 70 nights, and let's see, 70 nights in hotels. The total cost was 84 cents a night. The average, 84 cents a night. $70 was the total that I spent in 70 days. $70, and what was it? Yeah, it's like you couldn't find a single night in a decent hotel in Europe now for that price, you know. But it's gotten more expensive, let's just put it that way. That was back when it was the guidebook was Europe on $5 a day. And a lot of people said, can you really do it on $5 a day? Well, we did it on $3 a day, and with no problem at all. On the flight home, Gene and I spent the flight with 2 pieces of paper. We designed what we called a frieze, and it was all the highlights of the trip in different frames, and we'd take turns drawing them. So it's a souvenir that we shared, because I drew half of those art masterpieces, and Gene did the other half. But it was just a reminder of the joy of writing things down. And I really believe in that kind of being tuned in to the point where you actually have to capture, you write it down, you notice what were the highlights. And 5 years later, Gene and I had both graduated from college, and I whispered in his ear, "Go east, young man, go east." And we decided we would take the fabled Hippie trail from Istanbul to Katmandu. Istanbul to Katmandu. And that was, this was back in the 60s and 70s, when the Beatles were going to India to hang out with the Maharaja, or the Maharashi, and it just was a time when people dreamed of going on this hippie trail. And I was writing journals. Every year before that, and every year until I started actually writing books, I would buy an empty book. I remember we called it an empty book, and it was just almost exactly like what you've got with the Hippie Trail book, except it was totally blank, with a hard cover. And I remember thinking, anybody that writes a journal in a steno pad with a spiral piece of wire for the binding, that's crazy. I just thought, you kind of write it so it's going to last. So I would fill up these empty books like that, with beautiful print. I can't read my printing now, but back then I could read it. And you'll see in the book, there's photographs of the print. And as a matter of fact, while I'm thinking of it now, you can look at the actual original journal, a scan of the whole thing on my website. On the very last word in your book, it says, you go to ricksteves.com/hippietrail, and you can see the actual journal and a lot more photographs than you've got now. But I'd be so dedicated to these journals, and I've got 7 of them for 7 years of travel. And I would, 3/4 of the way through the trip, I'd see how many pages I'd used, and then I'd have to change my font in order not to run out of pages. It was like that. And when you write a journal, to me there's like, when you're on the road, little magic sparks, or maybe call them butterflies, flutter by. Yeah, butterflies flutter by. And it's great, and then it's gone, and you never have occasion to think about it again. And it's, whoa, that was really cool. And I'm just loving this trip. And if you can net them, and collect them, and write them down, even with the squished bugs on the same pages, you were right there. The best journal has got to be when you're right there. So I had that discipline. So on this trip we're going to see, I wrote a 60,000 word journal. 60,000 words, that's a 200-page book. When other kids were out there doing all sorts of crazy things, I was diligently filling in my journal. And also, I documented it with film. I had the trusty camera of the day, the Pentax K1000, totally manual. Manual is a blessing. I loved manual back then. I've never been a serious photographer, but the fact that I was there with a sense of what is an interesting, intimate thing to capture, and that I could do it and work my camera pretty well, and these photographs survived, is part of the perfect storm of almost, amazing things that happened to make this book possible. A lot of people wrote a journal, but I've never seen anybody with a collection of photographs that would document it also. But when you go on the road, I'll talk to the younger people here, you didn't used to just go, I'll take 6 or 8 pictures there, and I'll take another dozen here, and oh yeah, that's good, and take one more. You have 7 shots a day. You take 15 canisters, you have 36 frames in a canister, or 20, but why would you have 20 when you can have 36 in the same bulk in your bag? Because 20% of my luggage was film canisters, I would imagine. And I had a bag of film. And times 36, 500 divided by 70 days, you got 8 or 10 a day, something like that. So this was really exciting to be able to take that, and you would set the aperture and you'd set the shutter speed so that you couldn't, I knew that if I'm trying to get an intimate shot, I couldn't just focus right on that person because the intimacy would be gone. So I would focus on shade or whatever the light is in general, and then I'd say I want it about 5 yards away, and then I'd have my camera already cocked and loaded before I brought it up to my eyes. Anybody in the shade, anybody 5 yards away is going to be perfect. So I can just be walking like this and boom. If I've got a whole bunch of little kids trying to jump up and down and get in the camera, I go like this, and they all gather over there, and then I go, boom. It works perfect. So I ended up getting some decent shots. But this diligence and this discipline of writing the journal, to me, I think it's an important thing, just in travel in general. It's a beautiful thing. It helps you crystallize ideas. It helps you shepherd through important thoughts that you're having. And I never read this journal. That is this book. I may have read 3 or 4 pages of it, but you get home and life sweeps on through. And it ended up in a box, and I didn't read it until COVID. And I had some time on my hands during COVID. It was sort of like a forced sabbatical for a traveler. And I had all these journals, and I read this, and I just thought, this is like an anthropological dig into a 23-year-old version of me that I don't remember anymore hardly. I'm 3 times exactly as old as 23 right now. And I've always been sensitive about vanity press. The last thing I ever want to do is succumb to the allure of vanity press, just because my mom thinks it's great and I like it. So I sent it to my publisher, and they read it, and they said, you gotta publish this, this is really cool. And I insisted on doing it really candid. There's things in there that are very politically incorrect that you wouldn't do today, or you'd be, what's the word, canceled. But innocent 23-year-old on the road, 40 years ago, it's just honest. It's a coming-of-age trip. I was new to the world, and I was having the time of my life. So we have that journal that we're talking about now. And when I started writing real guidebooks, I didn't have the bandwidth anymore to do a journal. So I stopped doing journals, and I would do more writing, but I'd have my research and my writing, and then I started just doing all of these, which you can buy today right out there. Okay, so but that's what I've been doing ever since, and it's frustrating because I wish I had time to write a journal. Now, normally when I stand on a stage, on this very stage here, I've got an agenda. I want to share with you practical tips so you can learn from my mistakes rather than your own and travel better. I always say, when I get ripped off, I celebrate. They don't know who they just ripped off. I'm going to learn that scam and bring it home so you can learn from my experience and travel smoother. Well, we cover trip planning, packing, safety, communications, transportation, eating, sleeping, and crowding. But I just produced a TV show last month that is exactly that. It's a lecture, it's my best philosophy, my best practical tips, and you can watch that anytime. You can watch any show I've ever made for free on my website, and I hope you're a supporter of public television, you'll have the Passport app and you can watch anything I've ever produced there. But this experience in Europe is an hour-long lecture that I'm very, very proud of, and I'd love to share with you. But you can see that at home. And that's not the topic of what we're talking about today. We're talking about what was before that, and what is the making of a travel writer. The title of the book, On the Hippie Trail, Istanbul to Katmandu, and the Making of a Travel Writer. So that's what's, to me, kind of fun, because I like to look at myself when I was less thoughtful and less experienced and just green, and see what was happening that helped me find my niche, and then enjoy my niche for so many decades. And that's what I'd like to do kind of as I think out loud tonight. I think for the first hour, we'll just do the trip together from Istanbul to Katmandu. And then we'll take a short break. And then we'll take half an hour or so and talk about what was it in that experience that produced kind of a compost pile from which my passion for travel and teaching travel grew. Okay? So the making of a travel writer. If I look at my teaching now, it's all about being an extrovert and meeting people. If you're hiking on the Italian Riviera and you come upon an abbey and you go in and you're marveling at the church and you meet the monk that's in charge of the place and he says, I've got some homemade limoncello I'd love to share with you. Would you like to come into the abbey with me for a little while? The answer is yes, si, signor. This is beautiful. And you go in there, and I actually got drunk with an Italian monk with that view. That's what carbonates your travels, is meeting people. And you don't need to be a writer or a TV host, that anybody can have that kind of experience. Also, in your travels, you got to eagerly get out of your comfort zone. You gotta have the snails when you're in France. And you gotta be smart enough to know that if you've never been in France and you've had snails here, you don't know what good snails are. Okay, you need to go to the source. And then you don't have to like it, but you gotta try it. It's just that eagerness to enjoy getting out of your comfort zone. We learn so much on the road. And then another theme that I find, and if I look back to the Hippie Trail, it originated there, is the more understanding you bring to your sightseeing, the more you get out of it. Everybody wants budget tips from me. You know, we're all going to spend the same amount of money to get into this park to see the Pont du Gard in the south of France, to see the famous aqueduct. But what I can help you in a budget kind of way is double the joy and the value of that experience by inspiring and educating you to understand the context of this. This is not an aqueduct, as everybody says. It is the most scenic bridge in a 30-mile long aqueduct, built by Romans 1,800 years ago to carry a little square man-made river on the top of this thing, 30 miles, engineered so it drops 1 inch every 100 yards, so that gravity, rather than the sweat of peasants, would carry that water into Nîmes. That's what an aqueduct is all about. And that's why when you got beat by Rome, it wasn't necessarily the worst thing that could happen. You lost the war, and now you got stability, you got good roads, and you got running water. You know? So it's fun to kind of understand the context of what you're looking at. So we headed east, and we're on the train through Yugoslavia and through Bulgaria. And as I've been giving this talk, it's always too long because I end up trying to tell all the stories that I love, but they're in the book, so I will resist all the excitement on the train. But going through Bulgaria and going through Yugoslavia back in communist times was fascinating. And then we get to Istanbul, a city of 20 million people today. And it's been an important city for 2,000 years. This was the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire. For 400 years, it was the leading city in Christendom. During what we used to call the Dark Ages, when Europe was just rutting in the mud, the pinnacle of civilization was Constantinople, named after Emperor Constantine. And today, when you go to Istanbul, you feel this is where East meets West. There's 4 cities in Europe on my tour program at Rick Steves Europe that merit a 1-week tour just for that city. I've got 40 itineraries. We take 30,000 people to Europe every year on our tours. Most of the itineraries are much more long in many places, but 4 cities that I love just going in and staying put for a week with a good local guide. London, Paris, Rome, kind of obviously, and number 4, not even number 4, it's right up there with the others, Istanbul. I absolutely love Istanbul. I'll be there in 2 months with my TV crew, making a 1-hour special on that amazing city. Well, we were there as vagabonds, and it's just, you just lose yourself in the sea of people there, and it was clear to me, I had been there several times already, that I'm comfortable to this point. But boy, the potholes in the road are further east. You know, it occurred to me, not a single soul knows I exist between Istanbul and Seattle. And I didn't know a single soul between Istanbul and Seattle. No internet, no parents to come in and help. All of your money in a money belt. Every con artist and thug on the road knows you are a green, rich, white Yankee. You are a sitting duck for any games or con artist, or any time you screw up, it could be expensive. And expensive is a big deal, because what do you do if you lose your money? I didn't know. I knew I had to have $400 or $500 left over by the time I got to India to buy the one-way ticket back to Europe. That's all I knew. And we'll talk more about the challenges along the way. But in Istanbul, there was a place called the Pudding Shop, and it's still there today. It's in my Istanbul guidebook, and it's a great cafeteria. I love it. But back then, that was the place where all the hippies would hang out, and there weren't guidebooks back then. I mean, there was a Lonely Planet books, but they were just a couple years old, and I didn't really think there was anything that was designed for the hippie trail. But there was a bulletin board in the Pudding Shop, and that had hundreds of posters on there, you know, and you'd go there, and every day you'd go there and see who's leaving and who wants to team up in this kind of grapevine. Again, when I think of on the hippie trail, what feelings did I have that impacted me for my career that was yet to come? One thing was an appreciation of the importance of travel information. I was going to the University of Washington before that, and we had the experimental college there. I don't know if you remember that. And there was a guy that was teaching a class about the hippie trail. He was an older hippie. He was a real cool dude. And there's about 20 of us that signed up for his class, and he had done it. And there was no other information except from this guy's experience, and I was so thankful. And I paid my little fee, and I sat there, and he was phoning it in. He was disorganized. He could care less about the value of his precious experience transferring to us who are going to do it ourselves. And it really, I remember it made me angry. I was angry at that guy because he had the experience and we needed it. And just a few months later, I taught my first experimental college class about European travel, you know. When we were on that hippie trail, if I was on a 6-hour bus ride, half the people would be locals, half of them would be first world tourists. I would go literally up and down the aisle, and if any tourist had any information at all, I would buy it and read it, you know. And there just wasn't that much. So I was hungry for information. Now today, we have a glut of information. If there's any problem today, we have too much information, and it needs to be curated. But back then, just information is power. This is a line I have in all my classes. If you equip yourself with good information and expect yourself to travel smart, you will, you see. And we didn't have any information to equip ourselves with, so we had to learn just like every other rookie. We had one piece of information that we could buy, and that was a beautiful map that folded way out. I remember it was a very wide map. And this was what we would unfurl every few days and see how we're doing. And I remember this is going from Istanbul all the way to the end of the hippie rainbow, Katmandu. And we didn't think of it in terms of how many miles it was. We thought of it in terms of how many borders we had yet to cross. Because the borders were the big, scary, stressful things. Between the borders, it was just long bus and train rides or hitchhiking or whatever. It's a thin road. This is Islam. This is Hindustan. There's 1 billion people here. Probably 1 billion people in here, I don't know. But we were just sticking to the main road, and there weren't a lot of main roads. There's one paved road across to Afghanistan in the 1970s. So everybody who went from Iran to Pakistan went on that paved road because Baluchistan down here was too dangerous for tourism. So we crossed there, and then the cool, interesting thing is the first leg of the journey for us, Istanbul to Tehran, was one bus ride that we bought, like a big Greyhound, ticket. And we made friends with the first world travelers on the bus. And then we all hang out in Tehran and we disperse. But we'd see each other all along the way, all the way to Istanbul. In this big wide world, you'd see the same people you met 2 weeks ago over there. It was a little world in the middle of a big world. I was not aware at the time that this was a bit of an industry. There was tour buses that were doing the same thing. It's not a comfortable tour bus, it's more of a tour truck. And 30 travelers would ride in the back of that truck with their tents and their bags. And the truck had big wheels and it could go across the terrain and so on. I've been giving the talk a lot around the country, and when we have Q&A, one question that's always asked is, can women do this? And I was trying to think, it's interesting because I've got my journal and I've got my memory and I've got other people that can affirm or disagree with my memory. And so I'm trying to remember accurately what it's all about. But I remember a lot of women on the road, usually with a boyfriend, but a lot of women on their own or with a girlfriend also. But if you just look here, it's half women on the hippie trail. I'm inspired to make a big deal about this hippie trail because, of course, you can't do the hippie trail today, but you can do the metaphorical hippie trail. And I've got women on my staff who I really respect, and they take a sabbatical, and they're gone for 2 or 3 months, and they do their own hippie trail. I meet in my travels a lot of women that do the adventure. And of course, it's not as, it's more dangerous for women than it is for men, I think it's safe to say. And who am I to know what it's really like for a woman traveling in rough areas. But I know a lot of women that have had great trips, and a lot of women who set out alone or they set out with another girlfriend. So it can be done, and I think it can be done responsibly. But your hippie trail can be a bike ride across the deep south. It could be, you know, a big long bus ride in South America. It could be hiking around Mount Blanc. There's all sorts of things you can do that can get you away from home. I just love this idea that we can learn about our home by leaving it and looking at it from a distance. And at the same time, we can learn about ourselves. That's kind of what a hippie trail is. We just ad-libbed it. And we didn't know what our transportation connection was going to be, and we didn't know what our next hotel was going to be. We just knew we'd keep heading east until we got to Katmandu. In Istanbul, we shopped around. There's a lot of adulting on the road. You got to figure out your next transportation connection. You got to be thinking 1 or 2 countries ahead for visas, shots, and all sorts of stuff. And you had to attend to that before you could be on vacation. And we bought our bus ticket, which was a 2-day ride from Istanbul to Tehran. And we bought it, and we thought it was a very reputable tour bus company. It looked really good. And so we bought seats, rows 7A and B. And the bus came into the dusty lot for all the equivalent of Greyhound buses. And everybody stampeded for the bus, and they climbed over each other to get on. And we thought, what is this insanity? We're row 7A and B. So we just said, we're just going to wait. And when it all calms down, we'll walk in and grab our seat. Well, you can imagine, when we got to row 3, it became clear the numbers didn't matter. And we were the 2 stupid ones that there was only 2 seats left. And they were the ones that were added on as an afterthought over the stairwell in the very back. That just kind of, they glued it onto the back, or they screwed it into the back of the last seat. And it would go up and down. So whenever we stopped, we had to get out and open our seat up so everybody could get out. It's the only seats on the bus that was already an uncomfortable bus that didn't recline. And it was over something that made it really hot and really noisy and really bumpy. So we learned a lesson there. Every time I stood up to stretch, the driver, you can see him in the mirror there, he would see me. And it was like he had it out for me. And he looked at me and he goes, "Mister, sit down." And I wanted to say, well, Captain, I'm crumped up in this little tiny chair that you rented to me, you know. But he just didn't like me very much. But this became an odyssey, this ride. And we nicknamed our driver the Pirate. And he may have been not a likable guy, but he was a good driver. And he would drive all day, and then at night he had to give the wheel over to the first mate, and he would go and sleep in the little cot behind the last seat, you know, on buses. And I remember it was in the wee hours of the morning, and he had driven enough, so he gave the wheel to the first mate. Before he actually got into his bed, the first mate had run off the road, and the whole world was filled with smoke and sparks and people screaming. And I thought, this is going to be a short hippie trail. But lucky nobody was hurt. But it threw us totally off schedule. And we lost a day. It took us half a day to get the bus out of the gutter there. And then we had to go down and hang out at a car shop, and they tried to fix it up. And then we're on our... But from then on, the Pirate had no interest in keeping to any kind of schedule. So it just, we would stay overnight in hotel in little towns. And I remember the next day, he figured, this bus is starting to really stink. We're not going until everybody goes into the river and takes a bath. So the whole bus was ordered into the river. And it was funny because it was like a story, and there's so many fascinating characters on this bus. And when this became not just a bus ride, but an odyssey, everybody's personality developed, and it was quite a fun experience, at least in retrospect. At night, we would gather with the French people would gather together, and the English-speaking people would gather together, and we would sort of just consider our fate. You know, do we think, should we bail out? We could bail out and just catch another bus. Do you think we're going to get there? And all this kind of stuff. And you know, the police would come and they would say, "Whose cigarettes are these? Does anybody own these cigarettes?" And we all know, don't touch those. That's marijuana, and if anybody claims it, they're in trouble. There's all these little dangerous traps set for rich Western tourists. Rich is a relative term, and we were rich. You know, it was like we wanted to be poor, and we succeeded. We were privileged kids from America, able to travel around the world. By no means were we rich, we were vagabonds, but compared to the world, we were rich. And this was kind of a romantic thing, not knowing where you're going to sleep tonight. And I love that. I even tried later on to do a bus tour with 20 people on a big bus with no reservations. It was a charity tour, I remember. I was doing it to raise money for Bread for the World. And I figured, if it's a charity tour, all the money people were paying was going to Bread for the World. So I was paying for the tour. Nobody could complain if it was really bad. But I was wrong. But I learned that Americans are very good at being callous to homeless people. We're brilliant at ignoring homelessness in our midst. But if there's a chance that we might be homeless for one night, everything grinds to a stop. And as a tour guide, nobody could concentrate on what I was saying after 3 o'clock in the afternoon if I had not yet found reservations. It was the most fascinating psychological study. And this was back when before I was politicized and active and kind of stuff. I was just playing around and making money, taking people on tours. But I just thought, relax, I'll find you a bed. But they just couldn't. They went mentally on strike until we had a reservation. So this was an escape from the conformity and the materialism and the predictability and the homogeneity of our world. I'm trying to analyze the attraction of this. Because it was miserable, and we were loving it. And as we got further and further away from the Greek Isles, which was sort of haunting me, the Greek Isles, all the cute girls are there on the beach, everybody is having a party, it's just paradise for backpackers. And in 2 days, we could be on the Greek Isles. Should we keep going this way? I had planned to make this trip for I think 2 or 3 years in a row. And I found excuses to bail out. And this year I was hell-bent on doing it. But we kept going, and we kept wondering, we could always turn around, but something made us want to do it. And it wasn't the hotel rooms. I remember in one hotel, it was clear they had not changed the sheets from the person that was there before me. I won't tell you exactly how I knew that, but it was quite obvious. So I went down and I complained. My sheets are dirty. And he said, okay, I'll be right up. And then a few minutes later, he came up and he turned the sheet over for me. We were green, we were naive, we were oblivious. I love looking back on my greenness and my obliviousness. Many times I've been into a place that I should have been really tuned in and really inspired and really, fascinated. But I didn't understand the importance of it. And I just waltzed right through. I went to Hebron. Hebron is a very important city in the West Bank. Hebron is where the prophet Abraham is buried. And his tomb is there. 4,000 years ago, Abraham ultimately he became the founding prophet in a way or something like that of the Jewish faith and the Muslim faith. And the Christian faith, important too. Yeah, so right now, Abraham's tomb is in an old Christian building. His tomb has bulletproof glass on it, separating the mosque and the synagogue. So those two communities can worship at their shared prophet. And I was in Hebron, and I didn't even care to visit it on my first trip when I was just a kid. And now I go back with my TV crew, and this is the reason you go there. But there was all sorts of things like that along this trail that were happening that I was clueless to. I was in Iran, and the Shah was about to fall. In fact, one reason this hippie trail is such a unique experience that I happened to have, because it was the right time in my life for it, and it was the last year you could do it, 1978. The next year, the Shah had fallen, and Khomeini came back from Paris, and Iran became religious dictatorship, a theocracy. The next year, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. I was in Afghanistan and there was tanks parked on squares, and the menus said, everything is slashed, everything is 25% off, thanks to your brothers from the USSR. You know, things were percolating. I went into the market in Tehran, and you could see these, you know, if you've got a dictator, you've got his picture everywhere. And I remember looking at these, and my impression was cheap glass, cheap frames, you know, super duper dictator, frames and glass ready to fall. And when it falls, that glass is just going to be shards on the ground. I remember that was my takeaway from this. And a year later, they all fell. They all fell. I love the quote by Mohammed. I like great quotes about travel. And Mohammed said, don't tell me how educated you are, tell me how much you've traveled. So that naivete of mine was just the natural beginning, and hopefully a casualty of a lot of travel. And tell me how much you've traveled. If you study Islam, you know there's 5 pillars of Islam, 5 things that you have to do. And one of them is go on the Hajj, the pilgrimage, to go to Mecca. My Muslim friends have taught me that Muhammad didn't really care so much that you went to Mecca. The whole point of it was you had somewhere to go that would take you far away from your home once in your life. Once in your life, you should leave your home. And then you can broaden your perspective. You can appreciate God's great creation beyond where you were raised. And you can learn about yourself and your home by looking at it from a distance. That's the kind of lesson you learn when you travel. We're going to talk about people who don't travel in our country after the break. All right? Because if you haven't traveled, it's easy to be frightened, and it's easy to be manipulated, and it makes your country less safe. Look at these guys. These are the same guys that they bust in to the American embassy and paid them to shake their fist at the camera and say, "Death to America." A media circus that changed our whole outlook on the world. Ted Koppel and the hostage crisis. I made my 1-hour TV special on Iran, which airs on public television all over the country, mainly because I knew a lot of smart people like me had their perception of Iran created by a media circus called the hostage crisis. It was a terrible thing. They locked our guys up, you know, we had 20 or 30 guys locked up for 400 days. Every night, if you're old enough to remember that, we tuned into the news, day 378 of the hostage crisis, what's going on? And we just hated the Iranians. What a powerful thing. Death to America. When I was there, it wasn't death to America at all. It was just a party time, you know? We were connecting. It was beautiful. And there was amazing mosques and amazing festivals. And then that culture petered out and the next one picked up. These days when we travel, we generally fly from capital to capital, don't we? It's pretty rare now that we actually go overland over a border because we're so fast and wealthy and don't mess around at all. From London to Paris, to Rome, to Istanbul. I love crossing real borders. I love thinking, why is this border here? Sometimes it's a river, sometimes it's a ridge. A lot of times it's just a place where nobody wants to live, and this culture peters out, and then this culture peters in. And there's a border here, and a no man's land, and a border there. This is the most God-forsaken bit of real estate I have ever walked across. The no man's land between Iran and Afghanistan. Wow. And this is what all of the hippies did. And the hard-panned expanses was littered by disassembled VW buses. For some reason, hippies were taking drugs across borders. Didn't they watch Midnight Express? Scared the heck out of me. Enjoy the drugs, but I mean, they're cheap. Don't take them across the border and get thrown in jail. At this border, there was actually cloudy little glass cases that were display cases teaching travelers about people before them who got caught trying to smuggle things across. And there were displays showing where they hid it and where they are now and how long they'll be there. And you're waiting there, until it's your turn with the customs. Normally you put your bag on the top of the little bus and you're just downstairs with your little day bag. But when you approach a border, the hippie travelers knew you would take that bag and put it on your lap. And you'd go through it really carefully because somebody could have put something in there, working with the police or the customs of people, and they don't necessarily want to throw you in jail, they just want to take half your money so you don't go to jail. It's a common thing, it's very easy. We're the low-hanging fruit for that kind of scam. So we'd have our bags nervously on our laps, and we'd go, wait here, do that, there, and then they had this thing called the Yellow International Certificate of Vaccination. Do you remember that? It wasn't the International Certificate, it was the Yellow International Certificate of Vaccination, and we had it in our passport, even just to Europe. You had to show your shots. You couldn't go to Spain without this shot, and you couldn't get back in the United States without that shot, and so on. And you certainly had to have your Yellow International Certificate of Vaccination up to date to go from Istanbul to Katmandu. And we all treasured our certificates, and at this border, my friend Jean's Yellow International Certificate of Vaccination was not complete correct. So we had to wait until the nurse or the doctor came, and I remember being in this filthy little waiting room at the clinic, and then it was Gene's turn, and he needed to get that stamp, and you don't get the stamp until you get the shot, so he took off his shirt, and I, to this day, remember the needle bending as they tried to put it into his arm. That dirty old, well-worn needle. And I was glad I had my shots. So we're at the border, and you don't take generally you don't take transportation across. The transportation kind of peters out to the border. You'll walk across and you see what's going further east on the other side. So we'd hop in the next bus and we'd go further east. Well, a couple of hours into Afghanistan, and then I'll never forget this little episode. The bus pulls over in the middle of nowhere, it stops. And then the right-hand man of the driver stands up and he pulls out what I thought of as a Bowie knife. You know, remember Daniel Boone or Davy Crockett and their buddies had these big, nice, shiny knives. And he pulled it out and he said, in his broken English, "The cost for this ride has now doubled. Instead of $1.50, it's going to be $3, you know." And a lot of us were just indignant. "No, you cannot do that. That's not right. Don't you believe in the rule of law?" Or whatever. And I remember there was a gentle, dear Indian man that stood up and said, "It's going to be okay, please. It's not that much money. You'll be much more happy if you just give them the extra $1.50, and we'll all get to Herat safely." And we thought, he's actually correct. So we paid, and we went on, and we got to Herat. Now, Herat was all along the way, don't read the caption yet. All along the way, we were still thinking we could always go back to Greece. That's where all the fun kids are. That's where people really know to have a vacation are. 4 days, we could be back. We could be in Santorini in 4 days. But we kept going east, and all along the way, a lot of people were sick. Gene was sick quite a bit. You'll notice when you read the book. There was a saying among all the hippie trail travelers: there are two kinds of travelers, those who know they have worms and those who don't know they have worms. We knew Gene had worms. Okay, so we got to Herat, and when we got to Herat, this was like the point of no return. From this point on, you wouldn't go back. You're going to make it to India. Even at this point, we thought India's like coming home. I don't know what it was, but there was some gravity to India. It was just, I wanted to go to India. And so we're here, and all of a sudden, Herat is a beautiful, beautiful, entertaining, fun-loving Afghan town. And I had been knowing that the time will come when we're going to be tempted to smoke some marijuana. And I was a very, I don't know quite how to explain it, but you know how a lot of good kids don't just want to throw away their virginity? They want to do it in a way they'd be proud of. They want to lose their virginity in a way they'll feel good about themselves the next morning. Well, I had a kind of marijuana virginity, and I had gone 5 years through college not wanting to just succumb to peer pressure, and I'd never smoked pot because I thought it would cheapen me. I thought, I'm going to do it when it feels right, when it feels culturally correct. And if ever you want to go to a place that feels culturally correct to smoke a little marijuana, Afghanistan is your destination. It just was the right thing to do. Now, Gene was not so thoughtful about his virginity. He had long since lost it. And so he was my coach and counselor on this. But he scored some good stuff. And we were smartly going to smoke in our hotel room because you just don't want to expose yourself to somebody who wants an excuse to arrest you anywhere. And so we're in the room, and Gene says, you know, I just want to warn you, a lot of time people don't get actually high the first time they try, so don't be too discouraged, but we'll give this a whirl. So we smoke, and I remember just looking at the naked light bulbs dangling from the ceiling, and I thought, are those breathing? I think they're going in. And then I went up onto the rooftop, and I just became buddies with the man that was cleaning the rooms. I mean, he was just the janitor in the hotel. And we were standing there, just both of us marveling at how brilliant the stars were. And then I remember looking down, and Herat was filled with chariots. People got around on these two-wheel, horse-drawn chariots. And at night, they would have torches. And these gorgeous chariots were charging through the streets. And the stars were so bright. And from this point on, I don't know when you read the journal if it's actually how it was or how I thought it was. And I was actually, when I was reading the journal, I'm wondering, was it really this good? But it just was a cool thing right there to have that experience in Herat. I remember in Herat, it occurred to me, you don't need turnstile sites. All you got to do is walk and be immersed in this gorgeous culture. And I remember there's a rhythm. Every 5 paces, there would be a new shop, a new craftsman, a new little cafe, tea house, or something like that. And I would walk, and I would interact, and I would admire, and I would be inspired by the nobility of craftspeople, the pride, the workmanship, the humbleness. It would never work in America because our religion is growth, efficiency, affluence, you know. And they were stable. They were doing the same thing their parents did. They were not wealthier than their parents. They didn't have that aspiration. They were just living. They were proud of what they did, and they were in community. It's very thought-provoking. You can write a poem about it. And to this day, I just lament the fact that we have very little in the way of material possessions that conform to our hands. We don't let anything get so old until we throw it away and buy a new plastic one. And when you go to this part of the world, stuff is handmade, it's worn, and it's got that organic connection. And, you know, I mean, no, I'd rather have a nice car and an iPhone, of course. But it is a fascinating dimension of life that we are poverty-stricken by. One of my most treasured souvenirs is a backgammon board I bought in Turkey. And it's inlaid wood. And I don't know much about which wood is harder than the other, but in my backgammon board, the light-colored wood, which was the narrow triangles, is apparently softer than the hardwood that is the background for that, because each of the triangles is worn lower than the rest of it. It's got terrain, it's got topography, or whatever you call it, you know. And when I open it, I can smell the tea and the tobacco, and I can almost smell the conviviality in the community, and the dice are handmade. The little black dots don't even light up. I just love it. I would love dice where the dots don't line up. There's still 3 of them, but they're not perfect, you know. And that's kind of a charm about this country, where people paint their own buses, and you can rent a bike and go check it out. So as I said, there's one road across Afghanistan, one paved road, and I forget if it was paid for by the United States or by the Soviet Union. But I do remember back then that I was aware it was kind of that tug of war between the world powers. Are you going to be communist? Are you going to be capitalistic? We're going to make your road. But we decided to take a real nice bus company, Kadari, and we went in a timely fashion right across Istanbul. It was a great day. I remember in that ride, my takeaways. I love to just think, because it's a long time ago, what were the takeaways? Takeaway would be, everything was monochrome, one color, the color of the dirt. Towns, exactly the color as the dirt. Cemeteries, exactly the color as the dirt. When it was time for a potty stop, the bus driver would just stop. Men would go out here, the women would go on the other side. The men would just pee wherever they want. The women all had this big black robes or dresses, and they all squatted. And I remember looking at it, and it was like a bunch of tents, or a chessboard, or a mad teapot thing at Disneyland or something like that. Everybody was in their own spot squatting, and with no concern about privacy because they had that built in. And then, when they were done, they just walked away, and what was dry was now wet. If it was time to pray, same thing. The bus stopped, everybody get out, lay out their carpets, face Mecca, and praise God. When it was time to actually get a drink, we'd stop at a little, what looked like a Wild West saloon or something like that, and you'd just have half an hour to hang out there. Have a glass of tea, and then you'd carry on. See, I don't even know this show because I was out of order. There you go. At that, when you're getting your cup of tea, you'd entertain yourself watching the goat being skinned. That's just something that's happening. And we were watching the goat being skinned, and we looked into the back of the room, and we saw our bus driver was chummy with a bunch of other people that seemed to be hanging out there all day. And our bus driver and the first mate were all passing around a big pipe, and they were just getting shit-faced. And then half an hour spread to an hour, and then he comes out and he's really glassy, and he goes, "On to the bus, we go to Kabul." So that's when we wish we had our prayer mats out, I guess. But that was a bus ride across Afghanistan. I remember on that long bus ride, the cute little girl in the seat in front of me just stared at me for hours. I was like from another planet. And I stared at her too. It was a beautiful thing. And I kept thinking, what's her life like, you know? And she was wondering, what is he like? Where does he come from? What is it? How could you even conceive of somebody just traveling for the sake of travel when that wasn't an option for them, apparently? This girl stared at me, a little bit older, just beautiful. And her mother stared at me too. It's a man's world, in this part of the world especially. And I understand women wear the pants behind the privacy of the front door in the domestic world. But certainly on the street, women are downtrodden and don't have rights, and it's what we see today with the Taliban. It was there then. I've thought a lot about this, and I try just to learn and be open, not be judgmental. It's hard not to be judgmental about the way women are being treated, but I do remind myself that different societies are all on parallel evolutionary tracks. And not all of them have had the circumstances where they can evolve and progress yet. Not everybody has had their revolution. Not everybody has had their Reformation. Not everybody has had their Vatican II, or their civil liberties, or their women's suffrage march and successes. And some nations have. Some go ahead, some fall back. What we do is we don't understand that everybody takes time to evolve forward. And I think you got to do it organically. You can't be forced into it. And we have to cut people a little bit of slack when they haven't had the blessings that we've had in the way of a society evolving. We've had a lot of benefits because we're affluent. A lot of people could say that's because our economy has long been based on a kind of slavery. I mean, it's complicated. But to go out there and just learn instead of judge is an art form for a traveler, I think. And a lot of people are so quick to judge, and it clouds the experience for them. So I do my very best just to be an open sponge, learning and thinking and talking with people. Afghanistan's capital, Kabul, seems to be misplaced. To me, when I was there, I thought Afghanistan really should not have a big, modern, international-style city. But I guess you have to have that for some hub of communication and economy and connection with other nations or whatever. But even people in city outfits seem to me that they would be more comfortable in a tribal robe. I was in Kabul, and Gene was in the hotel because he was not feeling well, and I was just roaming around on my own, and I went to the cafeteria where all the backpackers go for lunch, and I just sat down, and I was joined by a local man, not this guy, but just some man, and he said, are you an American? I said, yeah. He said, can I join you? I said, you already have. And he said, well, I'm a professor here in Afghanistan, and I'd like you to know that a third of the people on this planet eat with spoons and forks like you do. A third of the people eat with chopsticks. And the third of the people on this planet eat with their fingers like I do. And we're all civilized just the same. We're all civilized just the same. After all these years, I don't remember a lot of things in the way of exact phraseology, but I remember that. And we're all civilized just the same. He had a chip on his shoulder. He's apparently an important guy in his community, and for lunch, he goes to the tourist cafeteria, sits down, and tells a tourist this story. And I thought, he probably thinks I think less of him because he eats with his fingers. And then I thought, he's right. And I thought, that's wrong. There's a drawer with dirty metal utensils that any Afghan can use to shovel it into their mouth if they want. But they would prefer to use their fingers for what God intended them to do, and that is to nourish you. It's a beautiful thing when you think about it, if you get away from our ethnocentricity. But our ethnocentricity is something that's a lot of times more powerful than we realize. On my next trip to India, I tried to adapt that. And I did pretty well. I went to nice restaurants filled with professional Indian locals. There was a drawer with spoons and forks for the tourists, but there was a ceremonial sink in the middle of the room where people would wash their hands, and they would just routinely eat with their fingers. It became quite natural for me after a couple of weeks doing that. In fact, I remember thinking, maybe I have to be retrained a bit when I get home, you know. But the world is not a pyramid with us on top and everybody else trying to get there. That's what I like. That's the takeaway. And when you travel, you find these examples. Later on in India, I was flying between Kashmir and Delhi, and I remember being able to, well, first I went to the toilet on the plane, and I was first impressed by the fact that I could look through the toilet and see the farmland down below. Which, that was mesmerizing to me. I've never done that on an airplane. So I'm watching the farm country, and then I thought, now it's time for fertilizer. And then I saw a decal on the wall next to the toilet, and it was a stick figure of a man squatting over the toilet, standing on the rims with an X on it. And actually, on an airplane in India back then, you had to have a decal because many people on that plane had never seen something to sit on, and they wouldn't know that you stick your dirty butt on the same thing that other people's dirty butts had sat on, and that's called civilization. They would much prefer to stand on it and squat over it, and that's just another way. It's not right or wrong. That's the beautiful thing. It's not right or wrong. Heading further east, we left Kabul and headed for the Khyber Pass. The fabled Khyber Pass. One of my favorite movies back then was called The Man Who Would Be King. It's a Rudyard Kipling story of these adventures, if you like that sort of romantic adventures in the Hindu Kush, check it out, The Man Who Would Be King. It's the only movie I've watched twice in a row in a theater. I just couldn't leave, I had to watch it again. Here we are in an area that is inhabited by people who are not governable. I mean, I forget the name, but these are the ungovernable territories. To this day, Pakistan doesn't rule them and Afghanistan doesn't rule them. These tribes people refuse to be governed in a modern way. This is the Taliban. This is where Osama bin Laden hid out effectively for so long. And even 20 years before 9/11, when we bought our bus ride from Kabul to the border of Pakistan, we had to pay what was called a surcharge for safe passage. A surcharge for safe passage, $2 more to guarantee your safety. No matter how frugal you are, you're not going to say, do I really have to pay that? Please take the $2. And when we were driving across that ungovernable land, I remember the little castles. And I thought, kind of like the robber baron castles on the Rhine River 1,000 years ago. This is now, but it's that parallel evolutionary track thing, you know. It's the same thing, the same economic dynamic, the same political dynamic, back when Germany was not governable, and it was a bunch of little warlords. I look at that today, it looks like a kid's fortress almost, but those are adults, and their wind-tattered flag is that tribe's country. Fascinating, really, when you think about the Taliban today. Fascinating also when you think about the spine of these people. They almost destroyed the Soviet Union. The next year the Soviets were there, they never were able to beat them. And they really whooped us as well. We spent $1 trillion trying to subdue these people. With all of our weaponry and all of our technology and all of our might, we couldn't do it. We could have beat hunger on this planet for $1 trillion. Instead, we spent $1 trillion and made countless enemies. That is heartbreaking. How does that happen? I mean, it must be a huge amount of greed if you're making money off of military stuff to willingly fight a war knowing you're going to keep most of that money and make a lot of money on it and leave the world in a big mess. I don't know, it's just complicated, it's thought-provoking, and you think about those kind of things when you travel. At the border, the other border of Afghanistan, you're sitting there and it's so weird. These guys, these rough, shady characters are trying to sell you cocaine. There's police and customs officials all over. They're looking at me, I'm the rich American. You think I'm going to give you 20 bucks for some cocaine? How about $10? But taking that photograph was a little ballsy, I'd say, but I wanted to have something to remember it by. But I remember my window there. This was a great perch. The window, I remember, collapsed into the wall, and it was about like this. And I had a Mona Lisa. You know how Mona Lisa has her arms on a kind of a windowsill almost, and then she's got this gorgeous view. I had a Mona Lisa view of the eastern end of Islam. And I was just ready for the ride of my life going over Khyber Pass. A little bit of yesterday's vomit was dried and crusted onto the outside of the bus, but I ignored that. And then we were heading east. And it was like, when you head east from there, I like to think of tectonic plates in my travels. Now, generally you think geological tectonic plates. But when you have two tectonic plates coming together, that's where you got volcanoes and earthquakes and all sorts of excitement. And you think about Gibraltar and Morocco, you think about Istanbul, where east meets west, and so on. And I think about where Pakistan hits Afghanistan, or where the Indian subcontinent hits the mountains. This is a geological tectonic coming together, but it's also a demographic tectonic plate. And right here, this is where Islam hits Hindustan. And ever since Istanbul, it's been the same climate, arid, hot, dry. A cacophony of minarets calling us to prayer. It's been a beautiful time. And then we leave that and we get into this fragrant, elegant Hindu world. With the monsoon coming down, the high humidity, and the lush environment. It's a beautiful celebration to go from one to the next and to be aware of it and thoughtful about it. And when we hit the border of India, oh man, when we hit the border of India, It was a big high-five moment. And we'd never been to India before, but it was coming home in our minds. I just do not know why. Maybe it was because English is the language of India, the heritage of the British colonial time. Maybe it's because India has this amazing infrastructure given to them by the English with all the trains. Maybe it's because Hinduism is a wonderful place to travel. I don't know. But getting to India, it was a triumph for us. It was a beautiful, beautiful moment and a very happy time. All across this trip, I was learning the importance of doing what you can to break the ice and meet people and talk with them. Not talk to people that are trying to sell you stuff at the border. Not talk to people who are doing the slap dancing and yodeling on stage for the tourists. But talking to real people. In Pakistan, we saw a bunch of medical students sitting in a circle studying in the shade of a tree. And we thought, you know, I bet they would find two American kids interesting. We have to assume we're interesting to people. You may not think you're very interesting, but you are interesting in the global south. We are more interesting now than we were a month ago. People have been asking me, what's it going to be like traveling in Europe these days, considering what our government is doing to the norms on this society, and how self-destructive it feels, and how insulting it is to our allies. What's it going to be like for us Americans to go to Europe? I really think it's going to be okay, personally, because I know Europeans are fully aware that societies end up electing people that are regrettable, or that are just buffoons. In fact, they elect them twice. I mean, Italy elected Berlusconi. You know, Hitler got elected. He had that little interim period when he was elected chancellor and he became that all-powerful dictator. Trump is struggling in that period right here, right now, you know. He got elected. He wants more power. And it's an interesting historical thing. It unfolds in a predictable way. We can learn from history. And when we travel, we have an opportunity to share who we are. I love the value of travel in the sense that we can get to know our enemies and we can make the world have better understanding. But we have to take the initiative to break the ice and meet people as travelers. And this was Hippie Trail, but you can do it anywhere you're traveling. I mean, some people are good at it, some people are very shy. But it carbonates your travel experience to meet these kids who would love to learn some English words from you on the road. Oh, wow, there's so much just to be fascinated by. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm really into this idea that the more understanding you bring to your travels, the more you get out of it. It's pretty lame to go to all the trouble and expense of a great trip and not know much, not do your homework ahead of time, so you end up going home without being transformed. Transformative travel is a word that's thrown around a lot in tourism. I take it seriously. I want my travelers on my tours, or people who use my books, to be transformed. I want them to come home with a broader perspective, with a dual citizenship, a keener appreciation of what it means to be an American, and how that can be something that is a blessing, as well as a brand new global citizenship. So perhaps when you go into the privacy of the voting booth, you vote with a little broader approach to this beautiful world of ours. Wow. I remember even as a kid, I appreciated that. In fact, in the last semester, or the last quarter of my time at the University of Washington, before I went on this India trip, I designed my own 5-credit class called Village India. Now that was at another age, when we were much more affluent, apparently, because you could go to school without getting out with a debt, and you could actually design your own private class and have your own professor. And I had my own professor for 5 credits, and we had a wonderful class. And I learned a lot about Village India in anticipation of this trip. And it paid off royally. It paid off royally. India's my favorite country. And again, it's perplexing because a lot of it angers you. How could 1 billion Hindus feed their cows better than their children? What's up with that? And a lot of people just cannot handle it and they'll condemn it. But I am determined to remind myself I don't understand why that is a fact. And I want to talk to people and find out, because there very well could be a reasonable explanation if we knew that culture. And I've got some theories on it, but it's beyond the scope of this class. But what I've found is if I go to places of worship, I want to learn from it and not judge it, and I want to be positive about it. The Sikhs are just a beautiful people, and they're so loving, and they're so hospitable, and they're so proud of their hospitality. And when you go to their holiest place in Amritsar, the Golden Temple, you feel that. You're very impressed by it, and you're made at home, and it's a beautiful experience. From there, we headed north for the vacation in our vacation. And even before we left home, we knew we were going to need a vacation by the time we got to India, and we were going to take a week up in Kashmir. Kashmir is the mountain kingdom. It's a little bit fraught in recent decades because it is ruled by Hindu India, but the people are generally Muslim. In the old days, it was all India, and there was a lot of strife between Muslim and Hindu communities. Then they had a big, ugly ethnic purification time where they sent all the Hindus this way and all the Muslims that way and created Hindu India and Muslim Pakistan, East and West, which became Pakistan and Bangladesh. Okay, and that's what we'll find today. In Kashmir, you've got a war going on. I think it's calm now, you can travel, but for many years you couldn't travel up there. And it's because of that split between Hindus and Muslims. Talk about a beautiful place to catch your breath. Up there in the thin, beautiful, crisp air of the Himalayas. Beautiful, beautiful spots like that. When you get into Srinagar, the big city, you're met by a little boy with a paddle boat. And he takes you shopping for a houseboat. And 100 years ago, this is where British big shots and Indian aristocrats would go to escape the heat of the plains that go up into the mountains. And they'd stay on houseboats. And Jean and I thought, for our own sanity, we need to spend a little bit more money and have nice hotels and safe-to-eat food. It wasn't asking too much, actually, but we'd go from, $4 to $8 a day or something like that. And we ended up staying in Muzaffar's houseboat with a beautiful terrace on top, a family living just behind, and royal elegance. It was just... It spoiled us after how we had been living, and we needed a little downtime. And that was just gorgeous. And you just sat on your roof, drinking tea, watching the world float by. And then when you want a little more adventure, you take a side trip up into the mountains and hire a pony or a little horse, and you explore. And I'll never forget, we got way to the edge of this little zone. It was called Gulmarg. And we took our horse across a meadow and then up a trail a bit. And we found a family that seemed to me totally off the grid. And I love to meet people that are just kind of like so off the grid. They hardly know how to respond to a handshake. It's just like everything is foreign. And it's this wonderful coming together. And that just was a magical experience as we were enjoying Kashmir. So from there we flew down to Delhi, fertilized the farmland, got to Delhi, the capital of the biggest democracy on the planet, 800 million people, and set out to see all the great sights in India, disrespect many of them. Taj Mahal. Taj Mahal is one of those places that is really built up and does not disappoint. I love it when a place is really built up and it doesn't disappoint. That doesn't always happen that way. But the Taj Mahal, yeah. Got to ride elephants. Felt like that zoo had been unleashed in a lot of towns. It's just animals everywhere. And we were traveling with abandon. And it just felt fun to be able to write it all down. It was like My journal for me was like a 60,000 word poem about this whole experience we were having. And it was a real blessing to have that mission, because I would have forgotten all of this since then, and it's nice to be able to share it. We wanted to create culture shock. A lot of people want to avoid culture shock. I didn't realize it back then, but we were just set out to create culture shock. We wanted to get away from the city and into the villages, use some of that stuff I learned in my Village India class, and to get there, you take the smallest bus in the direction nobody goes, and I do this in many countries. I like to get off the bus where everybody on the bus will caringly say, "Oh, no, you must be mistaken. No tourist has ever gotten off on this little village. You must have a problem. Maybe you're going to the lake, I guess. No, this is where we want to go." And then you walk through that town and you're greeted like a long-lost friend. And it's amazing. But there's no guidebook information, there's no turnstile sites, there's no museums, there's maybe not a restaurant that you feel comfortable eating in, but you just look creatively for something to do. Get a shave, get a haircut. I'll never forget, with my family, we went to Cuba, and one of the highlights was when my son Andy got a haircut. And it was just like this. Somebody had a barber shop under a tree, one stool. And you sit down and half of the village will gather around to watch. You realize you're providing entertainment for these people, and they probably still remember it just like I do. Look at the cute little prop for Jean's head on the back there. So you need to find ways to connect. You need to be an extrovert. You can't be too careful, or too cautious about that. Do something silly. If you see 4 women struggling down the road with their big cow's salad on their heads, ask if you can help out. And I could make it a few steps, and then I say, "Okay, you can take this back now." But I had that moment when she was like, "What's going on here?" And I was right in front of her, this far away, and we transferred that. It was a beautiful moment. I'm sure she remembers it with joy, just like I do. You can be out there on the edge of town and see a guy thrashing wheat and say, "Merhaba, can I do this?" I said, "What a nutcase, of course you can. I'll just..." Round and around the tourist goes. Go to a tailor, get outfitted. It was really great, by the way, to have local clothes. It was quite practical. People, I think, respect you more when you dress local. Know the political situation, the economic situation. I didn't do it on this trip, but on my next trip to India, I remember I'm a news junkie and I read a lot of, whatever I can to stay up to date on current events. And I do that on the road, current events back home. I decided for my time I'm in India, I'm not going to keep up to date on current events back home. I'm going to get up to date on current events in India. India's a good place to do it because India is the size of Europe and just as diverse, ethnically, politically, and linguistically. In order to have some common language for the whole subcontinent, it's English. English is the language of commerce. English is the language of travel, of tourism, and it was easy for us traveling that way. And their journalism is also in English, and they have knockoffs of Time magazine and Newsweek magazine, and it's all India, all English, and really quite entertaining and just fun to realize and it taught me the world is not a hub that radiates from the United States for all political news, which is how most Americans see it. There's lots going on out here that has nothing to do with us, and it's a good experience to have that once in your life. The Maharaja is the remnant of the old, super class system where you got the nobility with their big mansions. And they are like Europe's nobility, impoverished. They are, in a lot of cases, land rich and cash poor. And like in France, somebody whose family's owned a chateau for many generations, they're open Tuesday and Friday for the public to pay $10 each to go inside and see it, because this noble family is strapped for cash in order to fix their roof and pay their taxes. The same thing is here, and they will rent out their palaces. So this was an opportunity to actually live in a Maharaja's palace and to be thinking about privilege. And this was a real interesting thing to think. I was just typical middle-class American kid, but over here I was really wealthy. And it was a good exercise for me as just a beginner in adulthood to be thinking about that. Our privilege. We'd live in this Maharaja's palace. There was 5 servants waiting, and there was only 2 guests, so we had way too many servants. There was a rickshaw man that insisted on waiting for us. We told him, no, we just didn't want a man waiting for us because we're going to be here for 4 hours, and don't you have something better to do? I will be here, no problem. 4 hours later, we come up, hello, I'm here, can I take you somewhere? On the rickshaw. And I thought, this is culture shock. This is culture shock. And I didn't know it's something that's constructive, it just bugged me. And I realized that the reason for that culture shock is, in this case, is because we think of time differently in our culture. Think about how we term time. It's like money. It's a valuable resource. We invest it, we save it, we waste it, we spend time. India does not think of time that way. Time is like bubble gum, you play with it. And I distinctly remember bureaucrats that seemed to just be enjoying pushing my cultural buttons because they would take all the time in the world because they knew my time was important and his wasn't, you know. And he just let me just fester. And it was that different kind of culture, that ethnocentrism of mine, and I thought that was interesting. Now, when you're wide-eyed and not used to the graphic hardship on this planet, and the suffering, and the squalor, and you go to a country that has a caste system, where parents actually know if they're in a beggar class, if they love their child, they will disfigure that child and make that child a cripple, so that when they beg for the rest of their life, they'll come home with money. If you have a cute child and you're in the beggar class, that's a curse because you get no money. So these sad people with a bird on their shoulder and with scooting every day through the mud puddles, pushing the tin with their head to get a few coins. That's the caste system. It's heartbreaking to see. And I think it exists to this day. So slowly I was realizing the structural poverty on this planet, the heartache that comes with certain people not realizing that the more you consume, the less you enjoy or benefit from that incremental dollar of consumption. You can be steep on the learning curve and it makes sense to be excited about an extra dollar, but it does level off. And after a while, it actually doesn't make you happier. And I think about that a lot when I think about what oligarchs do to get wealthier. What motivates them? Will they be happier with more money? How could they trample other people who are steep on the curve of returns, who really need something in order for them to have more money that they don't need? What kind of a soul could not just do that against one person, but do that against thousands of people? Every time I think of billionaire, I think of what that money could do to make this world a better and a more stable place. Every time somebody wins $100 million in a lotto, I think, well, that'll make one person happy, I suppose. But I think if 100 people won $1 million each of them would be just as happy as one person winning 100 million. And wouldn't it make more sense to have 100 times the value of that? I don't know if that's just a hippie or a loopy idealism or what, but when you travel, you think about that stuff. And I think about it to this day. And that's why I'm really heartbroken with the news lately about USAID. Because I know the people at the other end of it. When you're in India, and if you're a normal-sized American man, you realize they're not built for 2 men at the same time. It's very uncomfortable. But we spent a lot of time on rickshaws, and this was our view, getting comfortable with some other person who was more lowly than us, struggling for 10 cents to bike us to the next spot. And then you got to decide, am I comfortable with that? Is that the way the world is? And so on. And then you step into a temple, and you realize that, wow, there ain't no Madonna and child here. This is like a 3D Kama Sutra every time you step into a temple. The whole thing was just intense. It was intense to be on the streets of India. As I said, the zoo had just let out. You got all of this, all of that at the same time. And sometimes you just needed to get out of it. A good way to get out of it would be to go to a movie theater. Bollywood. I love Bollywood. I especially love Bollywood when I'm about to explode in India and I just need to be in a dark place that's air-conditioned with nobody staring at me. A movie theater. You don't need to speak Hindi. The melodramatic plot is clear. And it's just a delight. Another way we escaped and just maintained our sanity was we invented a game called fan baseball. And if you laid in your hotel bed, and you'd both be, Gene would be on his bed, I'd be on mine, and the fan is going around like this. And you'd crumple up a newspaper into little tight balls of paper, and then you'd lob it up, and if the fan hit it to that wall, it would be a single, double, triple, and if you could make the wad of paper stay up there, you know that little spot above the fan? If you could make it stay up there, that was a home run. And we would play fan baseball quite a bit. On train rides, everybody stampedes onto a train. I love Indian train rides, especially the puddle jumpers, because the puddle, what's the word? Whistle stop trains. They stop at every little town. And at every little town, 15-minute stop, 10-minute stop, and it's a parade of beggars and musicians and animals and children, and it's just so entertaining. And I don't want to miss that. It's just endlessly, it's a kaleidoscope of Indian culture. And but I don't want to be right there in it. And what you do on Indian trains, every 5 feet, somebody else is there on the luggage rack. And my favorite place would be on the luggage rack next to the door, because the door was staying open when they were going. So you get the wind coming in and you can see the beautiful view of the flooded monsoon plains. And every half an hour you'd have that parade of culture coming through. And I just found my little niche and I enjoyed that. And there was just lots of ways that we were able to get out of the intensity when we needed to. Talk about intensity, Varanasi is a place where Hindus dream of going when they die. They go there in order to die. The most holy Ganges River, you want to die there, have your body burned and your ashes tossed into the river. Tourists do the voyeur thing of getting up at the crack of dawn and sailing in a little boat down and watching everybody worshiping in the water. And it's just what tourists do. It's part of the economy locally. Everybody ignores you. And you're watching this amazing, beautiful spectacle. And then as you're doing that, you see smoke coming up over a little bluff. And you know that's where they're burning people who've died. And you go up there, and I was not supposed to take this picture, but I knew I'd be standing right here in Bellingham 40 years from then. I've built a lot of fires, and you put a log on the fire, and after a while you hear it go, crunk, and then you push it in further. And after a while, and you push it in further. And that was my takeaway from bodies burning at the Ghats in Ganges. Wow. Hitchhiking out of there, huge monsoon. And monsoon is an enjoyable time. It's a joyful time because the water's coming down and that brings life. And everybody's thankful that the monsoon's there, even though it creates floods. We never knew if we were going to get into the next town or not with the roads flooding. And from there we went up into Nepal. We snuck into Nepal through the back door, going to the eastern town, the western town of Nepal, Pokhara, beautiful town. And like in India, Nepal had English as the second language. So I didn't know what the first language was, but you could always read the signs, Hotel Siddhartha, for homely. Please get here. And I just thought it was adorable, all the little, flubs in the language as they translated. Pokhara was a great town. And Nepal was a great place for marijuana. Now, the marijuana was when I think about it, people love to talk about marijuana and the hippie trail, but it was fundamentally, I think, freedom. It was just freedom, and it happened to be freedom via marijuana, But the marijuana was sold like an herb in the markets, and the marijuana was something that felt part of the culture because you just saw everybody was smoking marijuana. It's just like drinking alcohol. We drink alcohol, everybody's drinking beer. and in there it's a different intoxicant. I remember near Pokhara, we got high and we went out on a dugout canoe, and we saw what I considered an herbal essence waterfall. I don't know if that means anything to you, but I had this romantic image of the herbal essence waterfall. And we wanted to go there. We beached our canoe, and then we had to go through this jungle, very dense jungle. A jungle that became frightening, because we got halfway to the herbal essence waterfall, and it occurred to us, we are surrounded by demonic little black, head over tail slinky leeches that wanted to suck our blood. And they were all coming at us in this slow motion, unstoppable, head over tail way. You step back, they didn't care, they kept coming. There seemed to be more. And again, I don't know if it was because we were high or not, but it was scary. It was really, really scary. And when we got back to the hotel, we realized we had a few leech bites. But it was worth it because we got up to that herbal essence waterfall. To get from Pokhara to Katmandu, we decided to fly. A couple times a day, they got the cows out of the field and the propeller plane landed. And half an hour later, we were in Katmandu. This was the end of the hippie rainbow, where Hindustan meets Buddhism. And there's something just adorable about Nepal. It's a very poor country. I was struck with the fact that India, which I considered really poor, was the primary aid giver, development aid from India to Nepal. So there was something lower than India in the stepping stone of international aid. And when you get to Katmandu, you understand why this was so beloved by the hippies. Everything was just so delightful and full of people and full of joy and music. And all these hippies that were hanging out. There was a place called Freak Street, and there was a little cafe, I don't have any photographs of it, called Pie and Chai. And Pie and Chai was the Shangri-La for the hippies. It was out in a meadow, if I remember correctly. There was like a medieval rustic brick oven, like a pizza oven that would crank out fresh apple pie. And everybody, this wonderful collection of international travelers, poets, philosophers, freaks, deadbeats, sleeping character, people playing chess, people writing a poem, or, it was just a coming together. And you were already high in the Himalayas, and you had these peaks all around you, and you were enjoying the apple pie. They had the most perfect Western rock and roll music for the moment. The Doors and the Stones and all that. And then above it all, to make it even more vibrant, were monkeys. And these monkeys, I've got a paranoia about monkeys because I'm worried about rabies. I don't worry about rabies in Seattle with monkeys because I never see a monkey in Seattle. But I'm near a hospital, so it wouldn't be that bad. But when you're on the road, you're worried about a monkey scratching you or biting you because then you got to decide, do I go get my rabies shots? And I just wouldn't want to have to make that decision because you don't want the shots, but you don't want to get rabies, and there's no good answer. So I have this monkey above me, and I'm supposed to be high and happy. And I am eating my digestive biscuit. And when you're on the road, you have comfort food. And a digestive, if you've been to England, you got these wonderful digestives. It looks like a lot of people know that. And in Nepal and India, they come in little, like, airplane snack packages. Like 4 or 5 digestives in a little package. And the monkeys famously want your glasses if they're wire-framed and glinty. So that was a risk of mine. And they wanted my digestive biscuit. And the monkey came at me, and I just gave him my digestive biscuit, and he went away. And then a minute later, he came at me, and I could tell by the gleam in his eye, he wanted my whole package of digestives. He wanted all my digestives. And these were my salvation, my comfort food. I could eat this with no concern about my health. It was a beautiful little cozy refuge, my vanilla wafers. And he got my digestives. But it was okay, I still love Katmandu, and day after day we would just wander, and it was a city that endlessly entertained us, beautiful people, touching scenes, people that you just wish you could talk to, and little kids always going, I salute your virtues, namaste. Namaste, I salute your virtues. I salute yours too. And you walk around the town and you just got that little sing-songy sound coming from under the eaves of the temples, just below the orgy. So we went from Istanbul with the pirate all the way to Tehran. Then we worked our way across Iran to that godforsaken border. Then Herat, where it was too far to go back, and I lost my marijuana virginity. Kabul, where I met the man who eats with his fingers. Over Khyber Pass, the tectonic plates of Islam and Hindustan coming together. The lush monsoon land of India. Sikh country, up north to Srinagar for a break from our vacation. Down to Delhi, all the big sights of India. Through the back door into Nepal, finishing in Katmandu. There's many more places people go on the hippie trail. Many of the people staying there a long time would have to go down to Goa every 90 days to get out of the country and go back in to get a new stamp so they could stay another 90 days. And Goa was sort of the beach resort parallel of Katmandu up in the mountains. But we flew back to Europe from there. Okay, so that's the story. What I would like to do is I want to just take just a little stretch. I don't really want to take a full break because it'll get too late. And but I'll make a couple of announcements right now. It's so great to have Village Books here. Isn't it a great bookstore? My whole trip has been going with independent bookstores around this country. And, you know, I'll tell you, if you write books, you need Amazon and you need Barnes & Noble. Amazon buys 52% of all the books. Barnes & Noble gets about 30%. And the other 20% is divvied up among all of the Village Books. And it's people like us who keep those little bookstores vibrant. And it really is a great thing for our communities to have a bookstore that's part of the community. And I think that funds this kind of getting together. Just the act of getting together is, I think, a great thing. So I'm so thankful to be able to be a friend of Village Books. They've got a few books outside. I'm going to hope that, I think after I'm done talking, it'd be a better time to get them, but if you really want to get them right away. They've got a smattering of a lot of the books. They've got a lot of Europe Through the Back Door. That's the How to Travel book, 800 pages. This is the 40th edition of this book, and it's everything that we know about how to travel in Europe smartly. The Travel as a Political Act book. You're getting little doses of that in my talk right now. That's the book that I think is the reason why we travel is to broaden our perspective. And these are just good examples of how I've learned that in my travels. I had the great fortune of connecting with the ultimate expert on Italian cuisine in the United States, Fred Plotkin. And I just love this guy. And we partnered to make a very accessible book for foodies in Italy. And Italy for Food Lovers is a book that, if you like Italy, you'll love that. A great project during COVID for me was collecting with my friend Gene Openshaw, who you've seen on this trip, our 100 favorite pieces of art and putting it into a coffee table book. And it's a delightful read. It's like one little bite at a time, from the pyramids to Picasso. And it's a fun book to have, and Village Books has about a dozen of those out there today if you'd like to get that book. And I will be around afterwards to sign those books. When I do sign the books after we're done, I love to sign books, but with a big crowd like this, the last thing I want is a nice, polite English line, okay? So we're not gonna have a line. What I would like is a chaotic Italian mosh pit. A mosh pit, and it's a lot of fun. I've been doing this all over the country, and what we do is, 3 minutes after the talk's over, I'll go out there's a big blank space out there, and just hang out there if you want, and what I'll do is I'll go right to the middle of the group, and whatever you want autographed, hold it out, and I will just sign until there's nothing left to sign. It's remarkably fast, it's fun. I won't personalize. I'm not going to pose for pictures. You can take all the photos you want, but I'm just going to keep it real snappy because we've all got places to go. Okay, so if you want to get an autograph, I will do that afterwards. Village Books will certainly be here. They've got about 25 more hippie trail books if you wanted to get another one for your friends or something like that. And what I would like to do right now is just take just a 4-minute stretch. Just stand up and dream about your next hippie trail trip, and I'll see you in a couple minutes.